Flins C1 is insane and well worth your pull. Let's talk about it. My name is Juice and let's get into it. Okay, so Flins has an absolutely busted C1 and I'm here to shill it to you today because I actually think it's very relevant for a certain group of players, that being people who didn't pull for an Effa. However, if you did manage to get the robot lady, then don't worry, because even for you, his C1 is going to be utterly broken. It is very strong. Essentially, if you've ever pulled for a generalist weapon like Staff of Homa, or if you happen to have something like Staff of the Scarlet Sands, then you're actually going to want Flins C1. Now, even if you don't have a stat stick weapon, his C1 is still going to be better than his R1, unless you literally don't have a good weapon for him, but he does have a really good craftable, not a cry if that interests you. But anyways, back to the point. If you have a good stat stick weapon for him, then his C1 is absolutely more high value than his R1. Yes, you do miss out on the drip, but you definitely get a more valuable pull out of it. This is because it gives him the ability to cast 3 mini bursts instead of 2 during his rotation, and his C1 is able to all around compensate for not having an Effa. That's right, if you didn't pull for the character, that's fine. You can just get a C1, which is the same amount of 5-star pulls that you would have had to do anyway, and you'll still come out on top. Now if you have the robot lady, oh boy, you are looking at something absolutely busted. Because then, not only do you have an Effa, but you have an additional upgrade on top of that, which is utterly nuts. Not to mention that a fun little thing that players with an Effa can do is that you're likely going to be running Lady Farina if you have her, because essentially, even though her damage bonus % buffs do basically nothing for lunar reactions, her own personal damage, even at C0 on a Favonius sword, still warrants using her. However, the unfortunate thing is that your team's always going to permanently be locked at 50% HP. However, you do have an Effa's shield to help make survivability more comfortable. Now why is this relevant? If you have Staff of Homa, your HP on Flins is permanently going to be locked at 50% HP or lower, meaning that you're always going to be able to proc the weapon's passive, which actually ends up making it quite strong on him. So if you do have the robot lady and you plan to use Farina in his teams, then that's actually a really cool little thing that you can abuse. Now, if you don't have her, unfortunately, that's not really something you're going to be able to do, because you just have to use Ino if you don't have the robot. I really need to stress this. You need 2 Not Cry characters in his team, otherwise his 4-piece just isn't going to be fully procced, and he's not going to be making the most out of his own kit. So, the thing is, you literally can compensate for not having an Effa, and this is relevant because there are going to be plenty of people who missed her for whatever reason. So, with that knowledge, you're able to get him performing on that level with a full 4-star team, not to mention that you're likely going to run into some more Ino constellations along the way. The thing is, I don't want to sit here and say you could end up with a C6 Ino, because that's just not true. Pulling for 4 stars is very dangerous, and I would never encourage doing it deliberately. I've ended up with so many constellations for just trying to get certain 4-star constellations. But you will at least run into 1 Ino, unless you have terrible luck. I have had that terrible luck before with 4 stars, but generally speaking, you should run into at least 1 additional copy. Pair that with the free copy you get, and that's an Ino C1. And if you're lucky enough to get her C6 is honestly really good for Flins, so that's also going to really help him out. Another thing that I should mention is that if you have Staff of the Scarlet Sands, which is going to be your best bet if you can't use Farina in his teams because you don't have an Effa, considering the EM-based passive and he really likes EM, you would actually want to push to C2 before you consider R1. Once you get to that point, getting a signature weapon is going to be better than getting C3, but up until that point, you would still rather be getting his constellations. His cons really do so much for him, and they completely save you from having to worry about not having an Effa, and considering how many people have likely joined during 6.0, and they just naturally missed out on the last banner, I'd say that's pretty nice. This also just turns him into a banger electro DPS in general. Not only does it compensate for the lack of having a premium teammate, which is really nice by the way, but if you are able to build up to that premium team, oh freaking boy, you are easily going to have the best electro DPS possible. I do actually think that he's going to be at least on par with Varessa, if not just better. Not to mention that his vertical is better than Varessa's. The only real premium option you can go for with Varessa is Moika. Not to mention that for her, you want to get 4-star constellations like Chevrus and such. And as we all know at this point, getting constellations for 4 stars is not as easy as it may seem to be. Not to mention how ideally for Varessa, you're also going to want Eonson constellations. Yes, her team is inherently free-to-play friendly because a lot of the 4-stars she wants were on her banner, but consider how those 4-stars do want constellations. In Flins's case, I'd say if you have a C1 Ino, a Sucrose in general, and then just whoever on your 4th slot, you will be fine. If you have a Nefa, even better. His vertical is genuinely just better. So I think that in the long run, if you're a really big Flins fan and you're looking to invest into him, I do think you're looking at investing into the next best Electro DPS. And the reason why I think that's quite nice is because Electro DPSs don't really just fall out of the sky. It takes a while for us to get new Electro DPSs. There's usually a large gap in between them. So I would say that he's going to be the next best one for quite a while if you do make this investment. I think his C1 is just absolutely worth your time. It's not one of those constellations where it's really far out of reach and it's just kind of unattainable without some insane dedication. It's literally his C1. You can very reasonably save up for that, I would say. Granted, if you're a free-to-play, it is going to be harder to get, but this is me saying now, you should prioritize getting that C1 over his signature weapon. Now, what if you don't have his SIG? Even then, I would still get the C1 because it does compensate a lot. And he does have a really good craftable, which you can easily refine. Another nice thing is that polearms as a weapon type just have so many options. You have so many polearms at your disposal, many of them being really good stat sticks. So you're not going to be strapped for options. And if you don't have many polearms right now, basically any 5-star polearm that isn't on the more niche side is going to be good for him. Because we do have some more niche ones like Lumidu's Elegy, but even then, we have plenty of other really versatile ones to counterbalance that, such as Staff of Homa, Primordial, Jade Winged Spear, all that good stuff. You'll eventually run into a good polearm. My advice would be, if you're a new player and you don't really have many good polearms, it would be good to pull Homa for him. Not even just for Flins, but also because Homa is a really good polearm on the whole. I would say that even if you're a more experienced account, it's still a pretty good pole, because even though it's never best in slot on most characters, it ends up being extremely reliable. And in Flins's case, if you do have the Robot Lady and you have Lady Farina, you end up with that really unique aforementioned use case, where you can actually use the passive for once on a character that isn't Hu Tao. And besides, Hu Tao doesn't really use the passive nowadays, considering that Farina wants healers in her team, but you get the idea. You're able to turn what was originally something unfortunate, that being his survivability being a little bit more rough considering you're not really able to slot a healer into his teams comfortably, into something that you can actually utilize for his weapons. So ultimately, because we have such a vast disposal of good polearms, there is not really a reason to pick his weapon up over his C1, which does so much for him and really boosts up his performance for basically any type of player. It can compensate for not having an entire teammate, which is absolutely huge. Skirk's C1 is not able to do the same thing. Her constellations are very strong, but they just cannot compensate for lack of an Escoffier unless you really hard invest. Whereas, in Flins's case, his C1 is enough to cover for a lack of an Effa, and that's also just relevant for people who don't want an Effa. However, from a meta standpoint, this ends up being really good either way, because think about it like this. If a Nefa ran alongside Flins, you would have been preparing to pull 2 5-stars anyway, so it's basically not really that much different. Same deal if they were releasing one after another, or if they were coming out somewhat further later than each other. Though granted, that would have provided you more time to save, and I will say that trying to corner in his C1, especially as a free-to-play, is quite tight. Though I've personally 100% explored all of Not Cry, and I did that without the compass. I imagine that with the compass, it would probably be a lot easier because you literally just get the spots for everything. And I would say that you do get a lot of Primo Gems from exploring Not Cry, so I would say that is well worth your time. You're definitely going to get a lot of pulls from this. I do think this new version definitely has some good pickings to be had, so I would say that if you save up from now till then, you would have at least a chance. And at the very least, know this. If you're going for his C1, you're not wasting anything. It's at least being built up for the next character or whatever. So you just can't really go wrong here by at least trying for his C1. I would say that there's a good amount of time until Columbina releases, and if you're a really big Flins fan, I would expect that to be the next big upgrade to him. I imagine his teams are going to see a huge benefit with a release, much like how Moika improved the teams of all Notlon DPSs. So I would say this is well worth your investment, and if you've been saving up, or if you're a newer player, well, if you've been saving up, well, I would definitely say that the C1's worth it, especially if you really like the character. And second of all, if you're a newer player, you have so much map to explore. There are multiple 5-stars worth in all of the gameplay content that you can do. The permanently available content is going to give you so many Primo Gems, and the current Not Cry stuff, Like I said before, it feels like you get so many good rewards out of it. So, don't worry. C1 is honestly very achievable for somebody who's just started the game, even if your luck is absolutely abhorrent, because this game has been running for a couple of years now, so there is a ton of permanent content in the game at the minute. So, are you going to be pulling for a C1, or are you just skipping Flins altogether? Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video is able to tell you why Flins C1 is absolutely broken. This has been Juice, signing out, and I myself am probably going to be trying for it.